What's up, you guys, and welcome back to my channel. So today we're going to be talking about the disappearance of Ember Graham, and this is actually one of my most highly requested videos from you guys. You guys have been begging me to do this for a really long time and cover this case, and now that I've finally had a chance to dive into it, I completely understand why. There is not a lot of information in this case, and the circumstances are absolutely wild and unfortunate, and this is a 6-month-old baby girl that went missing that would now be 4. And there is an incredible amount of kind of conflicting information online. I will say I got a lot of my information from a podcast called California Dreaming, but this podcast got most of their information from the, I think, Finding Ember Graham Facebook page. But the host of California Dreaming couldn't really verify who was in charge of that Facebook page. I've gone on it myself. It appears as if someone in the family is possibly involved in this page. But either way, there's a lot of just crazy information out there about this case. Almost every single resource that I went to had something different. Unfortunately, it seems like there's also a lot of he said, she said kind of situations going on. Basically, all of this information is very questionable. So take what I say with a grain of salt. Make sure to do your own research if you would like to do so. And let's go ahead and just jump right on into the video. So Ember was only 6 months old when she mysteriously vanished from her crib in the middle of the night on July 2nd, 2015 from Happy Valley, California. Ember is the daughter of Matthew and Jamie Graham, and she was the absolute light of their lives. They were both fairly young parents, and they had a bit of a kind of complicated relationship, especially once Ember came in the picture. They both loved that child to death, but they experienced quite a few issues because Matthew himself was someone that drank a lot, partied a lot, he smoked a lot of marijuana, and it put a little bit of a strain on the relationship. And he also seemed to make rash decisions. From what I've seen, this was just kind of his character. There wasn't anything underlying going on. He just was kind of a wild card. Jamie said that sometimes he would come home and just randomly decide he didn't want Jamie to be living there anymore or Ember to be living there anymore. And he would kind of come home and freak out and say that they needed to get out. But none of this ever really stuck. And they ended up continuing to fight for their marriage. But after a while, for one reason or another, and this is something that I couldn't get to the bottom of, Matthew decided to move in to his cousin's trailer that she had on her land. Now, this land, I'm not sure if it was owned by his cousin Sarah. I am not exactly sure what the dynamics are, but I do know there were 2 separate trailers on the property, and Matthew stayed in one, and Sarah and her partner stayed in the other. Now, I couldn't really confirm or not what was happening in their relationship at this time. I have got the impression that they were kind of separating and that's why he moved out. I've also had the impression from other information and heard that they were planning on moving in with each other into this trailer, and Jamie was just in the process of packing everything up. I've not been able to confirm either, but either way, at the time that Ember disappeared, Jamie and Matthew were not living together. So on Wednesday, July 1st, Matthew actually took Ember for the night, and this was something that happened 1 to 2 times a week. This was not anything unusual. So Jamie dropped Ember off with Matthew that day. He had her crib set up in the front of his trailer, kind of near the front door, and then his room was in the back of the trailer. He put Ember to bed that night, and the last time he saw her was at around 11 p.m. And after he kind of put her to bed, checked on her one last time, he ended up spending the night smoking marijuana and then officially fell asleep. At about 5 a.m. the next morning, he woke up and went to check on Ember, and Ember was gone. She was not in her crib. She was nowhere in the surrounding area. He checked the trailer. Ember was nowhere. And I've also seen that the front door was wide open to the trailer. Now, this is another bit of information, however, that I have not really been able to confirm or not. I don't know if this was fluff added to the story, but I did see it on a handful of sites, so I just wanted to make you guys aware of it. Now, Matthew first called his mom hysterical. His mom seemed to be his go-to, the first person he went to when he had a problem, and he was trying to figure out what on earth to do. And his mom told him, go to Sarah's, go to your cousin's house, she was maybe 10 feet away in another trailer. Ask her if maybe she came and took Ember. Maybe you didn't hear her crying, something along those lines. Matthew immediately went over to Sarah's house, and she had just woken up. Her partner was up as well, getting ready for work, and he just kind of burst through the door. And according to Sarah, he was an absolute mess. He was bawling. He was on the phone. She wasn't sure who at the time he was on the phone with, but he asked her if she came in and took Ember. And when Sarah said no, he told her, "I can't find Ember anywhere." So Sarah panicked as well and decided to run over to the trailer that he was staying in and look everywhere that she possibly could for Ember, because this is a 6-month-old. 6-month-olds maybe crawl. Sometimes it takes even longer than that. They're definitely not walking. They definitely cannot pull themselves up out of like a pack and play sort of situation. So she went to check everything, and he went ahead to try to call 911. The call dropped the first time that he tried to make the phone call, so he waited a minute and then called Jamie to let her know that Ember was missing. Once he got off the phone with Jamie, he then called 911 again at 5:26, and within 15 minutes, authorities had arrived on the scene, and 5 minutes after that, Jamie arrived with her parents. When the authorities and Jamie got there, Matthew was kind of just sitting outside. I think he was sitting on a log or a bench or something outside of his trailer, and Jamie immediately went over to sit down with him, to talk to him, figure out any information that she could. It asked authorities to put an Amber Alert out, but unfortunately, Ember did not meet all the qualifications, but she was labeled as an endangered missing person, because Ember also suffered from a seizure disorder. So she required medicine 2 times a day to keep it in check. And this is something that she had her whole entire life so far. And no one was really sure how she would exactly react without the medication. It was a very, very scary situation. At this point, for obvious reasons, Jamie was hysterical, and Matthew decided to call his mom back to give her a little bit more information. She could hear Jamie in the background and kind of knew that the situation was so much worse than she had first, really expected. Matthew seemed to be a lot more calm than he initially was on his first phone calls to his mother, and at this point, she said he just kind of seemed lost and confused. But authorities, right off the bat, kind of got a different vibe from him and realized that things weren't exactly adding up. His story seemed to be very inconsistent, and according to authorities right off the bat, he did not seem very interested in finding Ember. To add to that, once they got into the trailer, they realized how unlikely it was that this could possibly be a stranger abduction. First of all, if you're not aware of statistics, it is much, much more likely for a young child to be abducted by a family member than a stranger. I don't know the exact percentages. If I find them, I'll pop them up here. But it's already unlikely a stranger abduction is the scenario for a young child, but especially because of the particular circumstances. The property itself that both of the trailers were on were surrounded by not one, but 2 fences that were gated, and there were guard dogs on the property. On top of that, the door to the trailer was broken, and the only way to open this door was by using a screwdriver in a very particular way, and there was really no sign that there had been a super forced entry. Also, the trailer itself was not very big. Ember was not very far from Matthew at all while she was sleeping, and she had a hard time sleeping because of her medication. It made her very restless, and she also didn't like strangers. So if any stranger had walked into the house, picked her up out of her crib, she immediately would have woken up, she immediately would have started crying, and being so close to Matthew, he more than likely would have woken up. There was absolutely no sign on the property or in the trailer that there had been any sort of abduction. It didn't take long at all for authorities to immediately jump to the idea that Matthew was possibly involved with his daughter's disappearance, and everyone around him strongly disagreed and immediately came to his side. Authorities did end up arresting Matthew because he had admitted to them that he had smoked marijuana that night and he was on probation. I know that he had a DUI at one point, but I'm not exactly sure what this probation exactly was for. I just know he broke the rules of it when he smoked marijuana. So they brought him in on this unrelated drug charge, but also because of their speculations, this was a way for them to question him, and they questioned him hard. He was questioned for about 8 or 9 hours. The interview was very intense, and still his story seemed very inconsistent. But one of the most alarming things to authorities and people now looking back at the fact, not a single time in that 8 or 9 hours did Matthew ever inquire about his daughter. This was the day after his daughter went missing from his care. He never asked what authorities were doing about her disappearance. He didn't ask for the status of her disappearance, their thoughts on her disappearance, what they planned to do, what they had already done. He did not mention Ember a single time outside of the questions that were asked of him. In the meantime, the trailer was still being searched, and after all the testing they could do forensically, they were able to confirm that no one had forced their way into this trailer and nothing had physically happened to Ember inside of the trailer. So it was basically one giant mystery because, again, a 6-month-old can't bust out of a pack and play and a trailer and just run off into the wilderness and disappear. Someone had to be involved. They just couldn't figure out who. And as the days went on, speculation just grew. While Matthew was being held in jail, not a lot of people outside of his family seemed to be sticking by his side. Matthew was not known to be the most stand-up person. He either owed someone money constantly, he either stole money from someone, stole property from someone, borrowed something and didn't give it back. He just was constantly getting himself into trouble with people and seemed to have kind of like a very selfish type of personality. And so all these people that he'd kind of burned bridges with were not taking his side in the situation. Now, unfortunately, the one thing that this also did was take a lot of the focus off of finding Ember, and there was an insane amount of focus on people lashing out at Matthew. Now, that is completely understandable. The authorities believed he was involved. I can see how that would make a lot of people angry, but unfortunately, these people put all of their energy into, spreading rumors, creating more speculation, and not a single one of them really came to help and find Ember. And Ember really fell to the back burner in the public's eyes. Speculation is something that's going to happen regardless. That's not something you can necessarily stop, but those same people just weren't putting the same amount of effort into Ember, and she was the one that was in danger. She was the one that was missing. Authorities kept on conducting searches. They even got to the point where they were following animals around, and they were basically waiting to see if there was any evidence of skeletal remains, clothing that she had been wearing, anything in their waist. That is how desperate they were. They thought, if she did get out, maybe an animal got to her. They were basically exhausting every single route that they possibly could. But they also wanted to look deeper into Matthew's story while they did all of these searches. So according to Matthew and his cousin Sarah, the day before, so the 1st of July, he went on a short trip after getting Ember that day and took her to the gas station. Now, this wasn't anything out of the norm at all. This was a typical trip he would make. He stopped into Sarah's trailer, asked if she wanted anything, and then he put Ember in her car seat in his truck and drove off to the gas station. Now, this should have been maybe a 10 to 15 minute trip tops if he was going incredibly slow. And Sarah mentioned that it seemed to take him a lot longer than normal, but she really didn't think much about it at all. So authorities decided to get the surveillance footage from the particular gas station. It was called the Happy Stop Market. And this is when they really started to see that there was even more not adding up with Matthew's story. You can clearly see Matthew arrive at the gas station with Ember in her car seat, and they both go into the store. Now, at this point, Ember seems fine. She seems very content in her car seat. She's got a pacifier in. She's happy as can be from what it looks like. He then pumped gas, headed out of the store, but he didn't go home. He went the opposite direction. When authorities asked Matthew about this, he said that he was just trying to drive around for a little bit to calm Ember down because, as I said before, her seizure medicine, it made her really restless. She was very upset, and he said that she needed to go to sleep, and driving around was a great way to calm her, which absolutely, if you are a parent, doing that is magic sometimes. Driving around in the car can put a kid to sleep in an instant. However, authorities already were questioning this story because based on all of the surveillance footage, Ember was already incredibly content, if not almost asleep in her car seat. But Matthew kept going with his story, and he said that he only went a few miles up the road and turned around and said that the total trip, in the wrong direction and back only took about 10 minutes. But surveillance footage didn't see him come by at that time. Surveillance footage didn't capture him heading back home until an hour later. When they confronted Matthew with this information, asking him what he did for that whole hour, he had specifically said, it took me 10 minutes to do this drive. I did a U-turn at this intersection, and then I went back home. He was very, very detailed about exactly what he did right after leaving the store. But once they brought that into question and said, we didn't catch you for an hour, what were you doing? Suddenly, he couldn't remember a single thing that he did after he left the gas station. Obviously, this is incredibly suspicious. Authorities then started to question if something happened to Ember in this time frame. They had originally been thinking, something happened in the middle of the night, but now they have this hour of time completely unaccounted for where Matthew cannot provide them with any information of his whereabouts. But Sarah quickly came to Matthew's rescue and said that she vividly remembered seeing Ember after this trip. Now, according to Sarah, again, he took a while to come back home, a lot longer than normal, but when he got there, he had Ember in his arms and he came to see her at her trailer. Now, this already creates an alibi for him, to prove that he did show back up at the house with Ember. That could totally make authorities disregard that random hour-long drive. However, Matthew's story did not match up with what Sarah said. Matthew claimed that when he got home from the store this hour later, he actually kept Ember in the car seat and then went and put her inside of his trailer to sleep. And then he went by himself over to Sarah's trailer. So now it seemed like Sarah was covering for him. Neither of their stories added up. It was turning into a massive, massive mess. For obvious reasons, shortly after this, it was publicly announced that Matthew was now a person of interest. Searches continued, and by July 10th, authorities finally found something. They ended up finding a pacifier in the middle of nowhere on the side of the road, and the specific road was Platino Road in Ono, California. Jamie immediately recognized this as a pacifier belonging to Ember, and based on the security footage seen of her at the gas station, this was the pacifier she had in her mouth on that trip. But they had no way to really explain how exactly this pacifier got in this location. It was literally the middle of nowhere. But what they did know is that that was the same direction Matthew was driving in after he left the gas station. Now, I personally have been on Google Maps and I have seen Platino Road in Ono and the gas station. And Platino Road is incredibly, incredibly long. There are definitely portions of it where he could have driven out there and back in the time frame, that 1 hour, but unfortunately there's also a massive portion that it would have been impossible for him to get to in that time frame. Unfortunately, they have never released the exact location where this pacifier was found, but because of the fact that they maintained this idea that he was a person of interest, I'm assuming that the location of the pacifier was a very accessible area for Matthew in the hour he had after the gas station. On July 11th, the next day, Matthew found out about the pacifier, and he was also set to go to his typical check-in with his probation officer that day. Now, this is another thing that I wanted to clear up. California Dreaming podcast actually helped clear this up with the Facebook page. Some sources say that he was going to clear his name. That's kind of what his mom really makes it seem like as well in the Crime Watch Daily episode, that he knew this pacifier was found and he knew it was an area that he, had been heading in that day. So his mom kind of convinced him to go in and talk to authorities about it. But he actually had to go there just for probation. So completely kind of different story in multiple different sources. But either way, it was all for probation. And this is where things get really bad and he starts not doing himself any favors whatsoever. So his mom drove him to the police station for this appointment, but instead of going in, Matthew ran. But not before somehow managing to take a gun and $400 from his mom's purse. Now, his mom immediately called authorities and said that a gun had been stolen. She stated on Crime Watch Daily that after he left the car and he ran, she then noticed that her purse was very, very light and she realized that the gun and the money were gone. Authorities immediately hopped on the situation. They informed Jamie not to go to her home because Matthew could be heading there. And now, not only was he a person of interest that is now on the run, he also skipped his mandatory probation meeting, and he was also now considered armed and dangerous. He soon was spotted at a nearby Burger King, but before authorities could get there, he ran and disappeared again. But after a day, he ended up stealing a car at gunpoint, and he didn't realize that the car was outfitted with a GPS system. So basically, authorities from then on were able to track all of his movements. By July 13th, early in the morning, I think between 5 and 6 a.m., authorities managed to track his car to Dunsmore, California at an intersection. When they got to the location, they found the car that had been stolen, and they brought out a canine unit to, smell the car, track his scent, and find him. And it didn't take long because the dog immediately went and alerted to a garage nearby. And as soon as authorities started walking up to the garage, gunshots were fired from inside. Immediately, authorities returned fire and started making commands for Matthew to come out, surrender, put his weapon down, all of the above. But Matthew didn't come out right away because what authorities were unaware of at the time is that Matthew hadn't been shooting at them. He actually attempted to end his own life. He shot himself, but he was not successful in that, so he was just badly, badly injured. After about 5 minutes, he slowly started crawling out to the front of the garage, and almost immediately authorities noticed that there was a gun tucked into his waistband. They started alerting each other, letting everyone know he is armed still, where the gun was, but it appeared as if Matthew was surrendering. He got out, he laid on the ground exactly as he was told, and authorities started to create a team that were going to go and apprehend Matthew. They put their guns down, they were talking to him, trying to calm him down. But before the team could get to him, Matthew pushed himself up and reached for his weapon. I'm sure at this point you guys all know exactly what happened next. 12 officers opened fire on Matthew, and ultimately it killed him. The entire time that this was happening, Matthew's mom was listening over a police scanner. She used to work for the sheriff's office, and she was still able to get on all of their channels. She was listening to try to see what was going on and basically overheard her son's death. They had called for an ambulance, but just moments later, they called the ambulance off, and she knew exactly what that meant. So now, the person that authorities believed to have all of the information on Ember's disappearance was gone and took any answers that he might have had with him. This impacted so many people. Keep in mind, innocent until proven guilty. There was a crapload of very suspicious information and questionable things in relation to Matthew and his involvement in Ember's disappearance. But at this time, there was no proof. There's still, as far as I know, no proof that he was directly involved. So in that time frame, his mother lost her son and her granddaughter, and Jamie lost her husband and her daughter. 2 people gone within 2 weeks for this family. The only thing that authorities really had to rely on when it came to Ember's disappearance was anything that Matthew might have known. He was acting so sketchy. There was so much questionable information. His stories were so inconsistent. Even people that, were there claiming to witness Ember afterwards, their stories didn't match his. They were banking on Matthew to solve this case. Authorities desperately continued to search, as well as all of Ember's family on both sides, but unfortunately, they were never able to find any more evidence or any answers. The pacifier was confirmed by DNA to have belonged to Ember, so at one point, she was out in the middle of nowhere, and nobody knows why. To this day, even past Matthew's death, authorities have said they still fully believe that Matthew was involved in Ember's disappearance. And interestingly enough, even Jamie has also now changed her stance. After looking back at information, she strongly believes that Matthew knows exactly what happened to Ember, and she also believes that Matthew's family knows as well, and they're not saying a word to protect him, to protect his memory, and to protect themselves. Jamie's come forward to say that the day that Ember went missing, she also questioned a few things immediately when she saw Matthew, but she wanted to stick by his side. She knew that she needed Matthew to get any information. She knew that Matthew was the last one to see Ember, and it was crucial that they work together. And you never want to think that your husband would do something to your child. She said when she first got onto the property and went to sit beside Matthew, she also, right along with the police, realized that he didn't seem very concerned at all, even to the point where she said it almost seemed like the things, the emotions that he was showing was faked. She said that he wasn't crying, but he was almost doing this forced whine. Everything just was forced, and it did not seem natural. He did not want to ask any questions about what they were going to do for Ember, how they were going to look for her. He just wasn't concerned. And she said that was the very first thing that really threw her off. Now, on top of that, Jamie also believes that Sarah is basically making up this fact that she saw Ember after the gas station. Now, the car seat was in fact found in the trailer. So many people believe that maybe Sarah thought she saw Ember and, really wanted to believe that Ember was okay. Maybe just seeing Matthew holding the car seat, you might assume, oh, there's a baby in that, because why would you assume the car seat's going to be empty? Some people believe that maybe she just fluffed up her story saying that she directly saw Ember in Matthew's arms to make it a little bit more credible. But again, we don't really know any of that information, but there are plenty of people out there, including Jamie, that believe that Sarah is lying about that. So all we know is that she appeared to be fine when they went to the gas station, and at some point after that, there's no telling what happened to her. Authorities have said that it's very, very likely Matthew confided in someone about what might have happened. At this point, the highest possibility is that he spoke to someone in his family, which is again why Jamie believes his family knows what happened to her, possibly even knows where she is. Now, one other thing that is kind of up in the air is that Jamie also wonders if Matthew running away was planned. And this seems to be one of the biggest theories within this case. It just seems a bit too coincidental for his mom to have $400 and a gun in her purse. Now, I'm not saying that's impossible. Some people carry around a lot of cash. A lot of people carry around a gun. But on top of that, how on earth would she have missed him taking $400 and a gun from his purse? As I said, she told Crime Watch Daily that after Matthew ran, she noticed her purse was light. That means that when she got into the car, her purse felt normal. To me, that means that Matthew took it while they were in the car. They were in the car together. Now, maybe did she go to a gas station and he take it out then? Totally possible. But a lot of people believed she brought all of this and basically set it up for him to run away. One thing, though, that really takes away from all of this that I do want to point out to those that are really going ham on that particular theory, if she wanted to support him running and help him run away because they didn't want him to go back in jail and they knew that he would go in for this probation check and chances are he would go back in, why would she immediately report her gun missing? That's like the biggest instant red flag, and that really put him in the position that led to his death. But at this point, that's all of the information that there is to go off of, and no more progress has been made that I am aware of. From what I've seen, it is entirely possible that Ember can survive without taking her medication. I have also seen that her disorder is something she could have grown out of. So it's not safe to assume that she's deceased strictly off of the fact that she needed seizure medication. She could be okay without it. But being so young, again, this isn't like a teenager that's run off. This isn't a young adult that's run off. This is a child, a baby. Someone had to have been involved. No ifs, ands, or buts. It's just, in what way were they involved? She would be 4 at this point and entering something like preschool in the near future if she's already not in preschool, and this is actually a great time for her to be recognized. Unfortunately, because of the time that she did disappear, if she was abducted or put into the care of somebody else, the multitude of different possibilities, she would have no idea any different. She wouldn't know she was a missing person unless she was told. She could be completely under a different name. She could assume the people she's with are her real parents. This is what's so scary about these situations, is that children that young can easily be manipulated into thinking whatever and growing up believing whatever. And that really lessens the chance that they will go forward to someone and say they think something is going on, and report the situation. So that's why it's so important to stress that she could be going into preschool, and different schools need to keep an eye out. She has a very, very distinct face. She has very distinct brown downturned eyes. They have done multiple different sketches of her to update her as she ages. I will obviously include as many of those as I possibly can. The only issue I have, however, with her possibly being out there somewhere is that the chances that she's with a complete stranger are pretty much slim to none. Authorities ruled out a stranger abduction from the home for the most part. You don't ever want to say anything's impossible, but there was nothing to point towards that being a possibility, or they would have put out an Amber Alert. If she is out there, maybe she's with a distant relative, maybe she's with a family friend. But again, the issue I have with that scenario is that I am positive authorities have exhausted all of those options. And I feel like if she had been placed in the care of someone close to the family, someone trustworthy, authorities would have found her. And I also don't see a reason as to why she would have been put in someone else's care. You know, why would anyone want to take Ember away from her mother? You know, it just doesn't make any sense to me. Ember also was only there 1 to 2 nights a week, if even, and I don't think it was the same night every single week. Don't quote me on that, but that also makes it very, very difficult, even for someone close to really know where Ember is, to be able to go and abduct her. If there's just a lot of different theories out there. There is also a theory that maybe an accident happened, and to me, this seems like the most likely out of all of them. A lot of people believe maybe Ember was given too much seizure medication. A lot of people believe that maybe she wasn't given any at all, so she ended up having a life-threatening seizure, and maybe Matthew panicked and didn't know what to do. My only issue with this is that she was fine when she went to the gas station, and immediately after is when he took this bizarre drive going in the same direction that her pacifier ended up being found. I just don't know. To me, that makes it seem like if something did happen, it was a little more deliberate than people maybe believe. He also just seemed very, very desperate towards the end. And unfortunately, we will never know why. There could be so many different reasons why he might have felt desperate. He could have just not wanted to go back to jail. It could be that easy. It could have nothing to do with guilt over anything. He just didn't want to go back to jail. He did not want to be questioned for another 8 or 9 hours about if he did something to his daughter. That's completely possible. However, could he also have been feeling guilty about something? Could he, maybe not live with the fact that something bad happened to his daughter, whether it was an accident or something intentional? Also a possibility, but again, that's something that we will just never know because he is no longer here to speak for himself. I do know that the family will not stop on either side. I know Matthew's family has hired a private investigator to try to figure out what exactly is going on. From what I've seen, he is just as dumbfounded as everyone else, and he has not found any more information. I've also seen authorities state that they have more information than the family knows, but they are keeping it to themselves. So, maybe there's something in there that explains why they still believe Matthew was involved, and they are just trying to find more to prove it and get further along in the case. This whole case is just incredibly heartbreaking. She was only 6 months old. This was Jamie and Matthew's first baby, and for there to be no evidence left behind, it's so scary to go off of speculation, and I know that's what our brains want to do. We want to find answers. The best thing that can be done for the case at this point is just sharing her picture, sharing her updated picture to get her face out there, make sure people at local daycares, kindergartens, just any sort of preschool program are aware of what they believe Ember would look like at this point. Because again, she wouldn't be able to speak for herself. She would not have any idea she was a missing person. She might not have any idea she's with someone she's not supposed to be with. And just like last week's video, this is pretty much fully relying on tips at this point. Authorities know that someone out there knows even the smallest bit of something. There was someone that might have seen them that day or seen something strange happening. I will have pictures of Matthew's truck up just in case. Also, do not forget that you can submit tips anonymously. I will have that linked down below as well. At this point, it has been a long enough time to where I feel like if someone knew something, it would be weighing very heavy on their heart. And hopefully at this point, they would feel comfortable enough to come forward. But there is a $10,000 reward for any information that leads to the whereabouts of Ember. But on that note, you guys, I'm going to go ahead and go. Thank you so much for listening to Ember's story. Let me know what you think down below. There are so many different theories in this case. I'm sure there are dozens of them that I have not gone over myself. So definitely leave those down below. Please remember, as always, to be respectful and remember that no one has been proven guilty as of this time. Thank you guys so much for taking the time out of your day to listen to Ember's story. Please don't forget to hit the subscribe button if you haven't already to become part of the Hallan fam so we can discuss more of these stories together and spread as much information as we possibly can to raise awareness for missing persons and unsolved murders and all of the above that I talk about on this channel. Thank you guys so much, and I will see you in my next video. Bye.